All right, so this morning's message, I feel like I need to give you just a tad bit of a warning when we're doing messages like this. Is almost, I guess it's more of a Bible study than it is a typical like sermon with personal appeal and stuff like that. Some people think that, well, you know, you've got to make every passage preach. But the fact of the matter is, every passage of Scripture is not about you. You know what I mean? So it's about Him. And this is kind of one of those passages that are there some applications to my life? Yes, there are. And we'll talk about a few of those things. But let's call it more of a Bible study type of a thing. Now, over the next few months, we're going to be looking at the life of Solomon. And Solomon is known as one of the wisest people ever to exist. During his rule, Israel thrived as a nation, really kind of fulfilled the land promise that God gave to Abraham way back in Genesis 15 and Genesis 12. Foreign rulers came to visit him just to see how great his kingdom was and how awesome his wisdom was. But Solomon, his story, like most of us, has a positive side to it and a negative side, and really a pretty dark. Solomon's story has some pretty dark sides to it. Yes, we see how great he is, but we see compromise, and we see error, and we see a falling away, and we see idolatry. And so, you know, the Bible, it doesn't just present some pretty picture, some pretty unrealistic picture of reality. What we see in the Bible are characters who are multifaceted, who in some cases you see some really good things come out, and in some cases some really bad things come out. A few years ago, 4 years ago, we ended our series on the life of David. And we ended that series right here in 1 Kings 1. I think we did 1 Kings 2 as well. With Solomon becoming king and securing his kingdom. And we start this series, and it's a few months long, pretty much the same way that we ended that other series. In fact, it's really, they're the same two passages that we ended that series with 4 years ago, but just seen from a slightly different angle. Not a majorly different angle, but just slightly different. You might remember that David was a man after God's own heart. And yet, he carried out some major sins. Can anyone give me a sin or two, the major sin or two that David carried out in his life? Adultery, right? And murder, right? David carried out adultery and murder. And yet, he was a man, the scriptures say, after God's own heart. And the scriptures classify him as a righteous ruler. And many kings after him, they did right, just as David, his father, did. The first two chapters of 1 Kings are an important bridge between David's and Solomon's rules. Solomon's rule almost didn't happen. He almost never even became king. You might remember Solomon is the son of Bathsheba. What do we remember about Bathsheba? What's that? She was the wife of Uriah the Hittite. What else do we know about her? I mean, we know some things, right? What's that? Pretty enough for David's eye, right? Now, she was bathing, right? David saw her bathing. David, while he was on the roof, saw her bathing at some level. And there's some conversation we had about whether that was intended to catch someone's eye or not, and we really couldn't come to a conclusion on that. But David saw her. He took her into his bedroom. He slept with her. Then she got pregnant. Her husband is out on the battlefield. David calls the husband back, tries to convince the husband to go, Uriah the Hittite, tries to convince the husband to go and be with his wife, to cover it all up. This thing's going on for months, this lie, this big secret. You can really kind of call it, to a certain extent, a double life, right? And then ends up murdering Uriah the Hittite in order to cover up his sin. You might remember who exposed David. Anyone remember? Nathan the prophet. Remember the illustration of a man who stole his neighbor's one sheep, what was sheep, right? One sheep, and then murdered it. And David said, the man deserves to die. And what did Nathan say? Thou art the man. You are the man. And so it's not a pretty picture that we see there. And yet, in passages like Psalm 51, we see David repenting. And we see what repentance really looks like, and really kind of being restored. And so Solomon is he's not that child, because that child ends up dying. But he's a child of David and Bathsheba. So he's kind of at a disadvantage here. You know, this marriage kind of resulted from adultery and murder. That's not the type of thing that gives you political positioning in the ancient world, so to speak, at least not in a theocracy where God is ultimately the king. But the Lord had told David that Solomon would be king and would build a house for him. At this point, by 1 Kings 1, David had dragged his feet a little bit, and he's waited too long to appoint a successor. And now David's time on this earth is coming to an end. 1 Kings 1, we'll read the first few verses here. Now, King David was old and advanced in years. It reminds me of my favorite verse of Scripture, which is, I think, Joshua 13:1. Joshua was old and advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, behold, thou art old and advanced in years. I love it. You know, sometimes old people just get offended that you call them old. But I guess I'm starting to get to the point where, like, young people think I'm old. Can you believe it? Can you believe there are young people that think I'm old? That's just wild. 44 is not old. It used to be old, like when I was in my 20s, but 44 is not old. Clean up on aisle 4. Now, King David was old, advanced in age, and they covered him with clothes, but he could not keep warm. So his servants said to him, let them seek a young virgin for my lord the king, and let her attend the king and become his nurse, and let her lie in your arms, in your bosom, on your chest, that my lord the king may keep warm. So they searched for a beautiful girl throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. The girl was very beautiful, and she became the king's nurse and served him, but the king did not lay with her, did not sleep with her. All right, so that's an important passage, and an important part of this passage that we're going to come back to here for a second. But this first part here, that David is old. Joe pushed too many of my buttons here and got me messed up. Old and advanced in age. So he's about, anyone know how old David is around this point in time? 70. You're up. Who said that? I thought that was you. Peanut gallery back there. 70. Which, you're not one to talk. But anyway, so 70 in that age is beyond a normal life expectancy, right? Beyond the average life. So it's like 70 today. 70 is like the new 40 in these days, right? Like people are living into like mid 80s and upwards to 90. Even a few decades ago, that wasn't really happening as much. So now it's just, with advance in medicine, advance in technology, lifespans are increasing, which, this is a good thing and probably a bad thing at moments too. But, 70 is old for David and advanced in years. And David has health problems. He has circulation problems. His blood isn't pumping to his body right. And that leaves him cold and not able to keep himself warm. And so this is a man who was once a mighty warrior. This is a man who once took down Goliath of Gath. like everyone else, David will die. And now he is so, and we'll talk a little bit more tonight about the idea of the temporariness of life. He's going to go the way of all the earth. And now he's a weak old man, and even the warmth of a young, beautiful woman can't keep him warm. But a key verse here in verse 4, a key idea is that he did not sleep with her. He did not cohabit with her. Here's a man who in his story has been charmed by women like Bathsheba. And now at 70, it's not even a factor. Physically speaking, he's just become a shell of what he once was. No longer able to function. And so it's time where, we have a situation right now in America. By the way, anyone hear about this Greater Idaho movement? These counties in the neighboring state is it Oregon? I think it's Oregon, are trying to leave Oregon and join Idaho because they believe more like the people of Idaho and not like the liberals of the city, Portland, and stuff like that. We have a little bit of an issue in our state right now, and that is, does our president, is he functioning mentally right now? That's a realistic thing, right? I'm not making that up. I'm not trying to tear someone down, but I mean, if you watch him and listen to him, it just doesn't seem that he has the mental capacity for the job. And that's not like the minority opinion here. That's basically anyone who listens to him for 10 minutes basically knows there's a problem here, right? And when that happens, in general, you start thinking, okay, we need to resolve this. We need to get someone in office who is actually capable of doing it. Right now, I think we all know the president has a group of people who are kind of telling him what to do. There's a little bit of a puppet thing going on right now. He'll show up at a press conference and be like, okay, so I'm supposed to call on 10 reporters and I have a list of all of you that I'm going to call on. And you're like, that's probably not something you're supposed to tell us. Let me see, the first one, so-and-so. And he's got all the answers to the questions that are going to get asked. I mean, when have you ever seen that in history? Well, David is kind of in this situation where David is getting beyond being able to rule. And he hasn't set up his successor. Everyone knows that David's going to die, and it's only a matter of time. And so he needs to get his house in order, and he needs to get his successor in place. And again, the problem is that David hasn't done that yet. And so his oldest remaining son, who is Adonijah, he's the fourth born, and he's an opportunist. Adonijah, it's one of the names I want you to remember today. There's going to be a few names today. Adonijah is one you got to remember. Adonijah, David's fourth son, takes matters into his own hands. Look at verse 5. Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. So he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen with 50 men to run before him. So we have three sons of David who are now dead. Amnon, anyone remember who Amnon is? Anyone remember how Amnon died? No, you're off by a couple, but you're close. Amnon rapes his sister, and Absalom ends up killing him, ends up murdering him at a banquet, right? Kileab just kind of disappears early in the account, so he's probably, he's either just incapable mentally or he dies at a young age. The third son is Absalom, and Absalom is the one who rebels against David, and he ends up having his hair caught in the branch, and of course Joab goes and murders him in battle, kills him in battle. And so Adonijah is the fourth born son, and he has the right at this point. He now has the right of the firstborn, and he thinks that he has a right to the throne. He thinks that age is more important than character or qualifications. That's what he thinks at this point, and that's what many people in the world have thought. Let's just look at, for instance, England today. Now that's not really a monarchy, right? They don't really have ruling authority there. but they're more like figureheads of the state. But the oldest one's name is, what's his name? Which one's Harry? That's the second one. William's the older one, and Harry's the second one. Well, who's to say, now I don't know anything about these guys, but what if William had terrible character and Henry had magnificent character? Well, William's the guy who's getting it, because age in that context, the way that's set up, is more important than character or qualification. That's kind of how Adonijah sees it right now. And so he exalts himself and says, I will be king. And this is the same problem that Absalom had. And so he prepares for himself at the end of verse 5, chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him, because this is what other kings did. And by the way, we have images from the ancient world. For instance, here's an image of an Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, riding on a chariot. Here's another one of an Assyrian king, the same Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, riding on a chariot and having men run before him. And here's like an illustration of King Tut in Egypt riding on a chariot. This is kind of like what kings would do. And so what Adonijah is doing right now is he wants people to see him as a king. And so he prepares for himself a chariot and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. This is a power grab. Adonijah is grabbing authority that doesn't rightfully belong to him and for which he is not qualified. That's what's going on right here. And to make matters worse, look at verse 6. His father, David, had never crossed him at any time by asking, why have you done so? And he was also a very handsome man, and he was born after Absalom. So he's not really getting the appropriate fatherly discipline at home. He has free reign to do what he wants. Ever meet a kid like that? What would we call a kid like that? You'd call him a spoiled little brat, right? Have you ever met a spoiled little brat? It's like you're in Walmart and you're in line and that kid is screaming and hollering because he wants his candy bar and the mom's not getting it for him and he's throwing a fit until the mom gets him the candy bar, right? I'll tell you what, you scream and holler for a candy bar, it's the last thing you're getting in my house. I'll get a candy bar and I'll eat it in front of you and I won't even give you one bite. That's how I roll. Or like the spoiled brats at the amusement parks who think entitlement, right? They think that they can just walk in front of you and get in line. You've been waiting in line for 15 minutes and they think, I don't need to wait in that line. And they're spoiled brats, right? Well, that's kind of a little bit of what Adonijah is right here. If he's truly to be the next ruler, if he's the guy, why not wait? Why not respect his father? Why not let his father appoint him to be the next ruler? What kind of man doesn't wait until his father dies before he tries to seize control of that which belongs to his father? What kind of person does that? Adonijah. That's the type of person who does it. He tries to gain the throne, and he has some heavy hitters as supporters, we see in verse 7. He had conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and Zeruiah is a woman, and with that's his mother, and with Abiathar, the priest, and wait a minute, I might be wrong on that. I had a brain freeze. I have to double check on that. And with Abiathar, the priest, and following Adonijah, they helped him. So what we have here is he has the support of the commander of the army. Zeruiah might be his father, I think. I don't know why, yeah. Looks like a female name, but I'm pretty sure I always got that confused because in Hebrew, the feminine words end with an AH sound in English. And I can't remember, to be honest with you. If someone get that for me, or I'll send me an email and I'll get that. But I think it was the opposite. I think I always thought it was a woman because it had a Hebrew female feminine ending, but it ends up being a guy. Whatever. Language can get you messed up sometimes. So Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar, the priest. So Joab's the commander of the army. Abiathar is one of the high priests of the day. And so he has some heavy hitters, but he doesn't have unanimous support. He doesn't have the support of some pretty important people in verse 8. But Zadok, the priest, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Rei, and the mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adonijah. And so he has the support of one of the main priests, but he doesn't have the support of the other. He has the support of Joab, but he doesn't have the support of Benaiah, who's really kind of like raising him, like he's going to be the next dude. Benaiah is going to be the commander of the armies. He's basically going to take Joab's place. He doesn't have the support of Nathan the prophet, who is extremely influential at this point. Now, you may not remember who all these guys are and everything that they've done because it's been a while since we've been in the life of David, but they're pretty important players. On a chessboard, they're like, I wouldn't quite say the queen. I mean, I don't know. Benaiah is kind of like the queen on a chessboard. Okay, pretty close. Maybe a bishop or a rook or something, right? Something important. I guess, what's the horse called? I like the knights. I like bringing my knights out early. You know, you could really cause some damage. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So Adonijah gathers his support, and he appoints himself as king in verses 9 and 10. Adonijah sacrifices sheep and oxen and fatlings by the stone of Zoeleth, which is beside En-Rogel. And I'll show you some of that in a second. And he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the mighty men, and Solomon, his brother. And so he goes just outside the city of David. Check this out. So this is kind of like an illustration of what the city would have looked like at that point in time. This is the city of David. Now, this might look nothing like how you would have seen or thought of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is considerably bigger. In the time of Christ, it's much bigger. But what you have is, you might have heard of the Kidron Valley, right? You might have heard of the Valley of Gehenna, or the Ben Hinnom Valley. You'll see that kind of here, and the Kidron Valley here. This little hill here, called the Eastern Hill, is Mount Moriah. And that's the hill on which Abraham nearly offered his son Isaac as a sacrifice in the early chapters of Genesis. And later on, this would be where Solomon would put the temple of the Lord. So some pretty important places here. The city would ultimately kind of get expanded over this direction. Well, if you follow the Kidron Valley down, and I can show you some pictures of that, not today, but it's basically it's like a deep ridge. Over here is the Mount of Olives, from which, Jesus would have taken his disciples. The Garden of Gethsemane would be over here somewhere. And you have some really excellent views of the city from the Mount of Olives today. A whole bunch of tombs are over here today. But anyway, if you follow the Kidron Valley down and the Hinnom Valley, where they meet, and you just go just a little bit south of there, right here, is En-Rogel. All right, so it's really just outside the city walls. And En-Rogel has there's a nearby spring there. And Adonijah throws a spiritual coronation party. And on a map, I don't think you're going to really see En-Rogel. The En-Rogel spring is right here. And the ancient city of David is here. Now, eventually, the city expands. But again, you're just talking a tiny, tiny, tiny little distance from the city, just outside the city walls. And he invites all the sons, all his brothers, but he did not invite Solomon. Well, isn't that interesting? I mean, you think he knows Solomon's the next guy in line? That doesn't say he knows that, but he knows that. He knows it. The Lord had told David this. This is kind of common knowledge at this point. So he invites everyone and he invites the one priest, but not the other. And he invites Joab, but not the guy who's really going to take his place. And he invites all the brothers, but not Solomon. This is a coup. That's what this is. He's trying to grab power the same way his older brother Absalom tried to do it years earlier, without the approval of the leader that God had instituted, who was his father David. Well, anyway, when Nathan, and we have to move through the rest of this a little more quickly. You know, sometimes I like to build the context a little bit. And then we don't have as much time to go through the account, but sorry. All right. No. Wrong Bible. Forget it. 1 Kings 1, where are we? 11. So when Nathan finds out what's going on, he knows he needs to act quickly. Nathan spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, "Have you not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, has become king? And David our Lord does not know it. So now come, please let me give you counsel and save your life and the life of your son Solomon." That's what's at risk here. I mean, if Adonijah becomes king, and this guy is not qualified to be king, he doesn't have the character. His poor character is clear at this point. Nathan knows what type of ruler Adonijah will be, and he'll kill anybody who is a competitor for the throne, and he'll kill Solomon and his mother. He would be a ruthless ruler, and it would be an absolute disaster if Adonijah becomes king. And it's against what God had set up to that point. And so Nathan goes and he tells Bathsheba, "So now come, please let me give you counsel and save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Go at once to King David and say to him, 'Have you not, my lord, O king, sworn to your maidservant, saying, surely Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne?'" This is not something that was done in secret. This is common knowledge. Nathan knows about it. Benaiah obviously knows about it. Solomon knows about it. Bathsheba knows about it. Obviously, Adonijah knows about it because he didn't invite those people. Did you not say to him, surely your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne? Why then has Adonijah become king? Behold, while you are still there speaking with the king, I will come in after you and will confirm your words. And so Bathsheba immediately goes in and does this. So Bathsheba went into the king in the bedroom. Now the king was very old. Anyone here over 70 or older? No, your dad's not 70-year-old. I didn't say it. God did. Don't get offended at me, So Bathsheba went into the king in the bedroom. Now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was ministering to the king. And then Bathsheba bowed and prostrated herself before the king, and the king said, "What do you wish?" She said to him, "My lord, you swore to your maidservant by the Lord your God, saying, surely your son Solomon shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne. Now behold, Adonijah is king. And now, my lord the king, you do not know it. You don't know what's going on in your kingdom. He has sacrificed oxen and fatlings and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king, and Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army, but he has not invited Solomon your servant. As for you now, my lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you. Tell them who shall sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise it will come about, as soon as my lord the king sleeps with his father, as soon as he dies, that I and my son Solomon will be considered offenders." They'll die. She basically tells him what's going on in his kingdom. She tells him about Adonijah and his supporters, that all Israel's waiting to hear from him, and that she and Solomon will be treated as criminals. Reminds him of his promises. And as soon as she's done, Nathan comes in, right? Says the same thing. And I'll move through this quickly. Behold, while she was still speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet came in. They told the king, saying, "Here is Nathan the prophet," whom David has great respect for, right? He's the guy who called David out, remember? "Thou art the man." And when he came in before the king, he prostrated himself before the king with his face to the ground, showing humility. Then Nathan said, "My lord the king, have you said, Adonijah shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he has gone down today and has sacrificed oxen and fatlings and sheep in abundance and has invited all the king's sons and the commanders of the army and Abiathar the priest. And behold, they're eating and drinking before him. And they say, long live King Adonijah. But me, even your servant, and Zadok the priest, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and your servant Solomon he has not invited. Has this thing been done by my lord the king? And have you not shown to your servants who should sit on the throne of my lord the king after him? In other words, have you approved of this? Is Adonijah king? Adonijah has undermined David's leadership at this point. And that type of thing can stir up emotions. If you're paying attention. When David hears what's going on, he springs into action. He immediately calls for Bathsheba to come back in. Then King David said, call Bathsheba to me. And she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. The king vowed and said, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress, as surely as the Lord lives. It's a way of saying this will definitely happen. As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress, surely as I vowed to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, your son Solomon shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place, I will indeed do so this day. Then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the ground and prostrated herself before the king and said, may my Lord, King David, live forever. And so David remembers his vow that he made, comforts his wife Bathsheba. She prostrates herself before him and shows respect. And David continues to move quickly in the next few verses. Then King David said, call to me Zadok the priest. He wasn't invited to the party. Nathan the prophet, who wasn't invited to the party. And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, who wasn't invited to Adonijah's party. And they came into the king's presence. The king said to them, take with you the servants of your Lord, that is David's servants, and have my son Solomon ride on my own mule, my own kingly mule, and bring him down to Gihon. Let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him there as king over Israel and blow the trumpet and say, long live King Solomon. Then you shall come up after him, and he shall come and sit on my throne and be king in my place, for I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and Judah. Benaiah the son of Jehoiada answered the king and said, amen. Thus may the Lord, the God of my lord the king, say, as the Lord has been with my lord the king, so may he be with Solomon and make his throne greater than the throne of my lord King David. So David acts quickly to get the situation under control. He appoints his son Solomon to be the king. He's got spiritual people involved, right? Like Zadok the priest. Right? Like Nathan the prophet. This is not, these are spiritually influential people. And by the way, David's main counselors are kind of spiritual people, right? And some of Solomon's main counselors are spiritual people. It's only once you kind of get down to the next guy, which is Rehoboam, where, Rehoboam kind of listens to some immature people and, things go a whole different direction. But anyway, he sends Solomon and the spiritual leaders down to Gihon. And just to give you just a real quick look, this is Gihon. It juts out from the city walls, the eastern city walls of ancient Jerusalem. And there's a spring there. And later on, last week we talked about how a later king, Hezekiah, in 725, about 300 years or so later, would divert those waters. We'd make a tunnel to get all those waters inside the city walls and this type of stuff. But anyway, David sends his son to Gihon, just outside the city walls. Like while that party's going on a little bit down the way, this thing is happening right here at the city in a public place. And they anoint him king, and it's public and it's visible. And Solomon goes and sits on the throne of David in verses 38 through 40. So Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the Kerethites and the Pelethites went down and had Solomon ride on King David's mule and brought him to Gihon. Zadok the priest then took the horn of oil from the tent and anointed Solomon. And then they blew the trumpet, and all the people said, long live King Solomon. All the people went up after him, and the people were playing on flutes and rejoicing with great joy, so that the earth shook at their noise. Pay attention to that. So they're playing on flutes. They're rejoicing with great noise, with great joy. And the earth shook. So is this like, hey guys, let's have a party. All right, only a couple people are invited and we're going to anoint King Solomon. Or is this like a loud celebration that reverberates down the Kidron Valley? Because here, let me go back to your illustration of. All right, so you see this little structure? This is Gihon. This is En Rogel. Oops. Is it a loud celebration that reverberates down? And remember, there's like this deep, valley here, right, between basically the Eastern Hill and the Mount of Olives. Kidron Valley. Does it reverberate down the valley to En Rogel? And now in En Rogel, you're hearing a celebration, and you're like, what's going on? What is this celebration we're hearing? What is this? You ever get close to like a festival and you could hear noise, or you get close to like go to like a professional ball game and maybe you're late or something. You hear the crowd roaring inside the stadium. You're like, oh man, what's going on? What am I missing? I want to be in there. I want to see what's going on, or something like that type of thing is what's happening here. All right. Anyway, so it echoes down the Kidron Valley to En Rogel to Adonijah. And up to this point, the people at Adonijah's party are having a grand old time, and they're eating and they're drinking and they're making merry. And then they hear the sound of the celebration in Jerusalem in verses 41 and following. Now Adonijah and all the guests who were with him heard it as they finished eating. So they're finishing up their meal. When Joab heard the sound of the trumpet, he said, why is the city making such an uproar? So he's clueless, right? I mean, how would they know? While he was still speaking, behold, Jonathan, the son of Abiathar, the priest, came. Then Adonijah said, come in, for you are a valiant man and bring good news. He listened to too much Joel Osteen. I'm going to tell you that right now. Surely you bring good news. Nope. I don't think so. Good enough for you, at least. Not good news for you. Good news for one person isn't necessarily good news for someone else, right? But Jonathan replied to Adonijah, no. Our Lord King David has made Solomon king. The king has also sent with him Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and they have made him ride on the king's mule. Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet have anointed him king in Gihon, and they have come up from there rejoicing, so that the city is in an uproar. This is the noise which you have heard. You're up the creek without a paddle, in other words. You better start digging, right? Because you're in trouble. Besides, Solomon has even taken his seat on the throne of the kingdom. Moreover, the king's servants came to bless our Lord King David, saying, may your God make the name of Solomon better than your name, and his throne greater than your throne. And the king bowed himself on the bed. The king has also said thus, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who has granted one to sit on my throne today while my own eyes see it. Even David, the king. So now, what's going on here? It's not like David says, okay, so I'm not king anymore. Solomon's now the king. That's not how it works in those days. It's a co-regency. So there's no battle for power here. David is the king, and Solomon is his co-regent until he dies. So now, you're done. You're Adonijah, and you've just made a power play to grab authority that doesn't belong to you, and now the king has set up his co-regent Solomon, and you're not the guy. It's not you. And David has bestowed upon him the royal blessing of God. And when they hear this, how do you think they respond? Are they like, oh, it's fantastic news, great, that's my bro. Brosif. Me and Solomon are like this. Solomon didn't get invited to your party for a reason, right? Because you're trying to steal his authority. You're trying to steal his place. Adonijah's party has just grown deadly. Because now you're all part of a coup. And everyone leaves. They want to get as far away from Adonijah as possible because they don't want to be considered rebels or conspirators. And Adonijah realizes that his plan has backfired and he fears for his life. Then all the guests of Adonijah were terrified. And they arose, each went his own way. And Adonijah was afraid of Solomon, and he arose and went and took hold of the horns of the altar So most likely to the tent of meeting, because the temple hadn't been made yet, and he grabs hold of the horns of the altar of burnt offerings that's outside the tabernacle, where they offer sacrifices and offerings. This is a holy, it'd be like coming to church. It's the closest thing we can come to, and there's nothing special here, but the closest thing we can come to is you coming and grabbing onto the pulpit or grabbing onto the Bible. And that's even better, right? Holding onto the Bible. You won't murder me with this book in my hands, type of a thing. Because Adonijah realizes that in those days, his actions are deserving of a death sentence. Basically asking for mercy, basically begging for his life. But when Solomon hears it, look at his response. Now it was told Solomon, saying, Behold, Adonijah is afraid of King Solomon. For behold, he has taken hold of the horns of the altar, saying, Let King Solomon swear to me today that he will not put his servant to death with the sword. Solomon said, If he is a worthy man, not one of his hairs will fall to the ground. But if wickedness is found in him, he will die. So King Solomon sent, and they brought him down from the altar, and he came and prostrated himself. You know what that means, right? It's like bowing down, and prostrated himself before King Solomon. And Solomon said to him, Go to your house. He could have had Adonijah killed at this point, but instead, and in part because David is his co-regent, because his father is his co-regent, he chooses to show grace and he chooses to show mercy. Adonijah's punishment is enough for now. He has been humiliated, right? Publicly had to come and bow himself before the king and show, hey, listen, you're the king, I'm not. And if he's a worthy man, he shall live. And so he faces public shame. We see Adonijah, who is a power monger. We see Adonijah, who's a man of poor character, who tries to grab power that does not belong to him. And we see Solomon, who at this point in time displays grace and mercy. And there is a certain lesson here. Again, that was kind of the Bible study part of it, and just give me a couple more minutes here. There's a certain lesson here for people who want to make a power play, right? For people who are power mongers like Adonijah, who try to seize power that doesn't belong to them. And that happens in churches. Especially churches. I mean, listen, deacon-run churches, that happens. Now our church is a deacon-run church. We have fantastic deacons. But there are churches, the pastor is just the hired gun. The average pastor, I think some studies some years back showed the average pastor stays at a church like 3 years or so, 3.5 years. I think that number's increased a little bit, but not by a ton, maybe 6 years, something like that. But you have a guy who's living in a town and he's there his whole life. And he takes certain ownership of the church like it belongs to him. He's been supporting the church financially. He helped them get a new building. He helped them whatever. He's bought the Bibles that are sitting in the pews or the chairs. He's paid for half of the chairs, and now he thinks this church is his. And he thinks that because of his money, he is qualified to really be the guy in charge of a church. It's not a whole lot different. In fact, he doesn't even really understand what authority is. Authority isn't power. It's not being a leader in a church isn't having power. In fact, a leader often, like Jesus says, shall be last, right? The greatest among you shall be your servant leadership. He's the guy who's serving people. Sometimes a leader is a guy that's getting stomped on and getting talked about, and the guy who's got to deal with garbage that other people don't have to deal with sometimes, and take it on the chin and be done with it. And leave it with God. Sometimes that happens in church. Praise the Lord, man. This church, I've had this conversation a few times. You couldn't peel me away from this church right now. Our church is in such a great place, but it hasn't always been such. And we've been in situations where people have tried to grab authority that didn't belong to them. We've been in situations where we've thought a guy matched qualifications to a certain extent and grabbed certain offices, and then a switch got flipped and thought they were the ones who were really in charge of the church and started controlling everything that wasn't even part of their realm. And that happens sometimes in churches. And those people aren't qualified to lead. People who want power are not qualified to lead in God's church, because that's not how God's church is run. It's servant leadership, not dictatorial leadership. So we need to watch out for people like that. We need to make sure that people like that don't weasel their way into offices. Because someone like that weasels their way into an office, and down goes the church. By the way, Adonijah is not going away. As some of you probably know, he's going to make another power play soon. And the situation's going to go a little bit differently. We'll see, I think, next week. But that's not really the main point of this passage. This passage is really about David appointing a successor. David is appointing someone in the royal lineage, in his royal lineage, which ultimately results in the rule of the Messiah. You know, God made a promise to David back in 2 Samuel 7. David has a son who will sit on his throne, and that son is Solomon. And over the next several months, we're going to be looking at his life. And although Solomon will become a great and wise king, he's going to fall. And I'm going to remind you over and over and over about that, because we see right from the very beginning, we see cracks in the armor. And that's a phrase you're going to hear 1,000 times in the next few months. We're going to see a crack, and we're going to see another crack, and we're going to see another crack. And these things are going to come back at the end to haunt him. But one day, there's going to be a messianic king of David, Jesus Christ, who will rule for 1,000 years and for all eternity. And there are no cracks in his armor. There is nothing. There is no compromise. There is no sin. In fact, God made him who knew no sin to become sin for us so that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. 2 Corinthians 5. And we can all have confidence in the rule of Christ. And anyone who might try to grab Christ's kingdom, aka Satan in the final rebellion, you could read about that in Revelation 21 and see what happens to Satan, where he is destroyed by the sword of the mouth of Christ. Solomon is a wise king and a foolish one. Christ is perfect, and his kingdom will be perfect. And so you can look forward to the perfect rule of Christ, where this type of stuff doesn't happen. Where the type of sin, because this is all sin, right? This is all a result of sin. And the problems in a local church, and the problems in a marriage, and the problems at work, it's all a result of sin. That stuff doesn't happen. Because when Christ rules, he will rule in perfect righteousness. He is the ultimate heir of David's throne, and one day he's coming back. And it may be today, or it may be 1,000 years from now, I don't know. One day he's coming back, and he will rule for 1,000 years and for all eternity, and you can have confidence in his perfect wisdom and his perfect rule. Let's take our hymnals and turn to 353. I went a little longer today. We started a little late, and I talked a little long early on. Sorry about all that. If you're not sure that you're a Christian, then you come and talk to me, and we'll get you lined up with someone who could explain the gospel to you more clearly. If there's other things in your life, if there's sin in your life, maybe it's a sin of kind of like Adonijah. Maybe it's a poor character thing where you're trying to grab authority and power that doesn't belong to you. Or maybe, I don't know. Can that happen in a marriage? That can happen in a marriage, right? Because God has set a marriage up a certain way, right? In certain roles within a marriage. Like, for instance, the husband is supposed to be the spiritual leader, and the wife has her role as well. But there could be a situation like the result of the curse, where a woman desires her husband's authority, right? That can happen. It can happen at work, where you're having a hard time submitting to whoever your boss is or whatever else, and there could be kind of like a play for his, or you try to speak down about your boss and try to grab his authority. Or it could be in any situation. It could happen at church. I don't know. Maybe there's conviction right now that you're experiencing because there's something in your life that's something like what Adonijah is doing. Then during this time, you take care of business with God. We're going to sing hymn 353, if you'd stand and sing with me.